Broadcasting live from the Capital OTB studios, this is Racing Across America with Seth Merrow.
Good morning. Welcome to a special Friday edition of Racing Across America. Why Friday? First day of the Breeders' Cup. So plenty of Breeders' Cup conversation coming up a little bit later on. We'll be joined by Terry Finley from West Point Thoroughbreds. They have Decorated Invader, a real contender in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. Steve Bick, he's been doing his radio show out there all week long, sitting trackside, watching workouts, having some of the prominent folks sit in on the radio show. So we got some of his thoughts on the upcoming 2 days of racing. Frank Mirahmadi, announcer at Santa Anita. He's doing his first Breeders' Cup. He's announcing his first Breeders' Cup. We talked a little bit about when he was a kid. He was at the first Breeders' Cup out at Hollywood Park. So we have some conversation with Frank Mirahmadi. But we'll kick things off with Nick Luck from NBC Sports. Nick Luck, of course, based over in Europe. So he's a great guy to tap into his knowledge on some of the Europeans who are always a little bit of a puzzle for us around Breeders' Cup time. So up first, Nick Luck, NBC Sports. Welcome back to Racing Across America, joined now by Nick Luck from NBC Sports. The Euros are always a little bit of a puzzle for those of us over here stateside on Breeders' Cup Day, so I thought we'd get some thoughts on some of the contentious Euros from Nick. Nick, good morning.
Good morning, Seth. How are you?
Very good. And how long have you been over here watching the horses working in the morning?
Well, I've been over since Sunday, so I've had a decent chance to get a look at most of them, and obviously I've been going backwards and forwards during the Challenge Series, so reasonably familiar with the European squad now. Probably lacking the marquee name, the star name, but there is some depth, and there's certainly a few interesting betting opportunities, I think.
And as I say, it's a little bit of a puzzle for us, so let's jump in and get some thoughts. Let's first start a couple ideas maybe on Friday in the juvenile races. In the juvenile filly turf, I like Albina. I used her in the mix coming off of the win over at Longchamp. There are a few Euros in there. What are your thoughts, Albina and the juvenile fillies turf?
I think she's the best of them on form so far. She is a Group 1 winner after all. The only blot on her career as it stands is the defeat in the Moyglare Stakes, for which she was heavily favoured. And that can be easily explained away by the fact that she was found to be in season that day. So, for all that it was very soft ground at Longchamp when she won her Group 1, I don't think that that's a prerequisite. She's got form on a sound surface, and I know she was considered to be the most naturally talented of Jessica Harrington's juvenile fillies this year, and Jessie is loaded in that division, absolutely loaded in that division. So I certainly wouldn't put anyone off putting her in the mix. And the other European you'd have to consider in the 2-year-old fillies race over a mile is Daya, who's got rock-solid form in the UK and has been targeted at this race a long way out. I think her trainer, Roger Berrien, who's got previous Breeders' Cup experience, is fairly convinced that the demands of this race will suit her.
And so juvenile fillies turf, a nice, as I say, lineup of Euros in there. The juvenile fillies, the 2-year-old boys, Arizona, we did a seminar here last night, and there was a little buzz on the panel for Arizona, the Aidan O'Brien runner. What do you think of Arizona and the juvenile turf?
Clearest class edge over a field of any European contender, I would suggest, Arizona. And the stable has a terrific record in this race, whereas their record in some of the other races isn't quite as good. So he's got obvious claims. He's coming here off the back of a second in the Dewhurst Stakes. One of the best 2-year-olds Aidan O'Brien has brought to this event on what we know of him so far. My only reservation is that he's posted wide, he's big horse. I think he's going to have to get out of the gate and get a handy position. I would think. It'd be interesting to see what tactics Brian Moore adopts.
And, you know, speaking of different riding styles, and of course the courses over here are a little bit different, I was listening to Steve Bick's show yesterday, and I heard you on there, and I wanted to expound a little bit on what you were talking about there on the track surface. And you said this year they came over and put a number, gave a measurement to the Santa Anita turf course, and you were comparing the number that Santa Anita got to the maximum numbers that are usual over in Europe for some of the turf courses. Just talk a little bit about that and the difference.
The first thing to note is that the Santa Anita surface was completely consistent all over. It's very unusual in a European turf course to have exactly the same breeding at every point of the track, but that's pretty much what they found here, and perhaps you'd expect that. But I think that's encouraging. I think consistency is everything in a racing surface, whether it's firm or good or soft. You don't want horses to be going from one surface to another in the same race. That's when you get problems. So a pleasingly consistent result, but it is by European standards very firm. They've recorded a going stick reading of 11. It was the sort of firmest ground you're likely to find in England. Going stick is normally around about 9.5, something like that. Having said that, you're talking about a different type of turf, and whether it's a reasonable comparison, I'm not quite sure. But I think what we can say is that it's going to be the quickest ground that most of these horses have ever raced on.
Which, again, makes it interesting, puts a little extra puzzle into the handicapping. And again, it got cut off there a little bit because tomorrow we're going to drop Nick in with Saturday thoughts. So we had a longer interview with him, but we just put the parsed out Friday and Saturday. So we'll have more from Nick tomorrow, talking about Euros on the Saturday card. And again, we taped those yesterday, so I'm not a quick change artist. That's why the different jacket. But given the time difference between here and the West Coast, just made more sense to catch people a little bit later in the day yesterday. And one of those people was our friend Frank Mirahmadi. Hadn't talked to him in a while, but we wanted to tap in and get Frank's thoughts. He's calling his first Breeders' Cup this weekend. He's been in the industry now for a while, bouncing around various tracks, Northern California, Turf Paradise. He had, of course, the great calls you can find from the Turf Paradise Marathon a few years back, where he did imitations all the way around the track. But he was at Oaklawn, now bounces between Monmouth in the summer and Santa Anita. But he also shared some memories of going to the first Breeders' Cup at Hollywood Park. So up next, our friend Frank Mirahmadi. America, happy to be joined now by Frank Mirahmadi, track announcer at Santa Anita. Frank, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Very good. I don't think we've talked to you since maybe early in the Monmouth meet, so let's just catch up. How was summer on the shore?
It's always great on the shore. I've lived in the same apartment right there in Seabright, across the street from the Atlantic Ocean. Monmouth Park Management, I would have to rank them the coolest people I've ever worked for. And just a great environment, a lot of passionate people. Nothing but applause for the Monmouth team. Love them all.
Very good. And back to Santa Anita for opening day out there for this fall meet, which includes the Breeders' Cup. And as I was, reading up and doing some research, I also heard you on with Bick yesterday morning. You attended the very first Breeders' Cup out at Hollywood Park in 1984. Give us some memories of Breeders' Cup number 1.
That was so awesome. I remember when my dad bought the tickets, I could just still remember what they looked like, and he wanted to make a special occasion out of it for me, and the two of us went. A lot of times, I have one brother, and a lot of times my brother and my mom would go with us, but for whatever reason, that was a day for just the two of us to go and enjoy that experience, and we certainly did. It was a great father and son moment. I lost my dad 13 years later in 97, so I miss him every day, and I certainly, without any question, think of him every day when I go to Santa Anita because of the unbelievable number of times he took me there. But that day was just very, very incredible. We saw Royal Heroine with that incredible performance in the mile, and we saw so many great races, and we saw a whole new thing in horse racing, and the crowd was buzzing. Everyone was well-dressed, and I remember exactly where our seats were, and it's just one of my fondest memories. So the thought of actually calling the Breeders' Cup, which I'm going to have the opportunity to do on track, is something that I am so grateful for, and it means the world to me.
And when we read stories about Super Bowl number 1, the cheap tickets and nobody, I think, could see what it was going to become. But I think that the horse racing community really embraced the Breeders' Cup from year 1. So I'm anticipating or thinking that there was a solid crowd there and into it, particularly with the international flavor it brought to the United States.
Right away, it was packed. And, you had the East Coast horses out there. And, for me, at that stage of my life, I really wasn't all into the, following the East Coast racing. Remember that simulcasting was a very different situation. That's so right. I was not up to date on all the Eastern horses and things of that nature. I was a big fan by then. Believe me, I was a fan by age 9. I remember, almost crying that we didn't get to go and watch J.O. Tobin defeat Seattle Slew, and I didn't eat dinner that night. I was so upset when the Slew lost, and we listened on the radio live. So, that was 8 years prior. And for me, 7 years actually. But so I was into it, but I just, when Chiefs Crown came out and those East Coast horses, of course, I took the West Coast stance at all times in those races, just because you have to always, wave the flag, right?
Exactly. And J.O. Tobin, there is a memory. Yeah, very good. So you were at the first Breeders' Cup, and since then moved into the announcing game, and you've been in Northern California tracks, Turf Paradise, Oaklawn, as we said, Monmouth, and now you're the regular caller at Santa Anita, which means this year the Breeders' Cup. Talk a little bit about that, what it means for a guy who's been an announcer now for a while, your thoughts, your anticipation, your excitement level for the weekend.
It's as good as it gets. These are unbelievable horses. There are a lot of tough names in here and a lot of big fields. And I think the most important thing for me is I'm just trying to teach myself to stay calm, because the big days seem to bring out a lot of adrenaline and energy. And so I want to just stay calm and just do the best I can and do justice for these great races and for the fans and make sure that I deliver. So there's a lot of pressure. But a lot of excitement. How can you not be excited about getting to see these kind of horses and call them? It's an incredible thought, and we want everything to go where every horse gets their best trip. That's all I could ever ask for. And interestingly, this will be a year that I won't be trying to make any hits at the windows, because certainly won't be putting any dollars down on the Breeders' Cup when you're calling it. That's enough action for 10 times over, to just call them and to enjoy the excitement and to not have any bias or any thought or any, interest in anyone in particular. I will say I will be rooting for McKinsey in the Breeders' Cup Classic, because Brad McKinsey was an employer of mine. He was a friend of mine. All the guys who own that horse are friends of mine, and so is Bob Baffert, very good friend. But that said, I wouldn't mind seeing Vino Rosso get some revenge, because I still think that if they went 3 laps, they were never going to pass him last time, and he deserved that win, and he's a very nice horse, and he looked magnificent on the track. He really did. So whoever wins, it's all about celebrating their moment in front of the crowd and to let them, my job is to just give justice and give praise to the people who win, and that's what makes my job so fun every day, is that I'm not here to worry about who wins. I'm just here to describe what happens and kind of stay out of the way and enjoy the moment. There was a horse that Bill Spar trained named Enjoy the Moment, and I often say that to myself. I love the name of that horse, and that's what it's all about.
Great way to look at it. You've kind of alluded to it, but what is your prep work? And I asked that because you mentioned the names, and with foreign horses coming in, and we're going to interview Nick Luck as well and talk about some of the foreign horses. And I went and had to look at some of the foreign races, so I make sure, like there's a juvenile I like, Albigna, which it was how I would have pronounced it, but when I pulled up one of the European race replays, it's Albina. So what is your kind of prep work going into the Breeders' Cup?
You watch replays. I watch replays, and Larry Colmus and I actually had a conversation the other day so that we stayed on the same page with one another. He is excellent about name pronunciations. He always has been. He's been a perfectionist and a stickler to get it right. And so we went over a few, and I think the final score was he won 10 of our discussions, and I won 1. As far as I thought one name, Imprimis, sounded correct, and it had been called that way, and that he told me was the Latin version, and that the American version is actually Imprimis, but we decided together that we will stick with Imprimis there, but he was very helpful in doing a lot of research, and we'll do one more round of follow-up. It's important that broadcasters and such stay on the same page. Obviously, he's going to be on NBC, I'll be on track, but even the commentators that are talking about different horses, there are a lot of horses over the years that people call different names. And I think it's just best to try to stay as consistent. Another one, Basilica, is one, for example. A lot of people call her Basilica, and Amy Zimmerman, our head of broadcasting, has made that crystal clear the first time she ran at Santa Anita, that it's the correct pronunciation of her is Basilica. So you just want to stay on the same page with everyone. And I got the Silks pages printed. I usually just color them on, so those are the little tiny graphics on the right, which is not the way I normally do it in my program, but I've just looked a little bit. I don't want to overwhelm myself with that stuff, beforehand because there's just too many horses to get them all memorized immediately. I'm going to watch some replays, which I've watched very few, and just look and become a little more familiar with the horses. But at the end of the day, if I stay calm, I know I'm going to be fine. That's the whole thing, to not be intimidated, but rather look at those mountains and be invigorated, right? That's what it's all about.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you that because it's a big day, obviously, and I would anticipate probably Friday morning or Friday afternoon as you head to first post, maybe there'll be some butterflies. But you've been doing it for so long, I assume that it just becomes more excitement than anxiety.
Absolutely. I have, I think that for some reason in the last year or so, maybe year and a half, I've been calmer for the bigger races. The Big Cap game and so on and so forth. This year's Haskell with Maxim. Even the Haskell gets you all fired up because that's what it's all, those are the big events. Those days are very stressful, actually, for all of us that work in the game, but they're also what we all look forward to. So I think you're right. It's you have to have a little bit of butterfly, and you have to have a little bit of excitement. But at the end, just remember what I've been doing this for 23 years at a lot of venues. Louisiana Downs is one that I always find was a very important job in my career because it was early on. I started at Hialeah in '96, and then the next decent-sized job I got was Louisiana Downs, and it was very important because I had a lot of, as let's say a quarterback would say, a lot of reps at Louisiana Downs, and that signal got a lot of coverage because it was a bridge track between the East Coast and the West. And so we got a lot of coverage on TVG during that time, between 2000 and 2005, and I thought that job helped me get more. And we had the Super Derby, so there were some good opportunities. I got to call Tiz now. The bottom line is it should theoretically be easier to call famous horses because I'm not going to be trying to say to myself, Code of Honor Green, Code of Honor Green. I think I know who Code of Honor is, right? And so those elements leave you so you're not lost. There are a lot of names here that I've never seen before and that I want to pay a little more attention to and watching some replays. I think the first day might be tougher, but the other side of the coin is, as my lovely girlfriend Jennifer told me, one of the good things is there are undercard races. And so by the time the Breeders' Cup comes on, we'll be like, oh yeah, next is the 5th. So I will have already been in the booth and gotten going a little bit, just like when we had opening day at Santa Anita. I did the seminar, and you kind of get some butterflies out of your system there. Once you get going, I guess it's just a matter of doing a good job. And I'm a perfectionist, so no matter what, I won't be happy, but I'll try to be as happy as possible.
You do a great job, and I'm sure it'll be a great Friday and Saturday. Let's talk a little about some of the horses and get some thoughts watching out there. And one a couple I want to talk about. Go back to October 5th and the Santa Anita Sprint Championship. You called the race. It was the comeback of Omaha Beach. Chancelot, who we saw up here in the monster effort in the Amsterdam. Chancelot had the lead. Omaha Beach comes up the rail, and in the comeback effort, hadn't been seen since the Arkansas Derby, wins that race. Well, Omaha Beach comes back in the dirt mile. Chancelot comes back in the sprint. It seems like they're working well, but will that race have taken something out of them, or will they both come back and kind of validate what we saw in that sprint championship?
I absolutely love Omaha Beach coming back in the mile. In fact, I'm no trainer, I'm no horseman, but I was disappointed he didn't go right to the Classic. And I know that, almost every person I've mentioned that to told me it was a crazy idea to come to the Classic. But my theory, which of course I would never question a legendary trainer like Richard Mandela, he's doing the right thing that he knows is right. But in the end, Omaha Beach doesn't read the form. He doesn't know what the sheets look like. He doesn't care about buyer speed figures. He wants to run, and he wants to run long. The issue is he was coming back off such a long layoff and some issues that he had, and it was a gigantic performance. And we can't lie to ourselves and say that doesn't take its toll. That said, I believe he'll be ready to fire. I believe he is the best horse in that race. And, he handled Improbable with consummate ease when they met in Arkansas. I have to believe that Omaha Beach is going to win the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. On the other hand, the issue with Chancelot that I question is it's a tough thing because in that race, when Omaha Beach came to him near the quarter pole, I thought Omaha Beach was going to blow him right off the track. I couldn't believe how well he was running at that stage. I'm like, wow, this is a router coming after him. He's got to gobble him up. And it took him a long time to get by him. And And had Chancelot held on, it's amazing how close photos make people think one way or another. The thing about Chancelot is he's extremely fast. I happen to like Catalina Cruiser or Matoli in that race if I was to handicap it. It's just my opinion. But I saw Jorge Navarro at Clocker's Corner, and he looked at me and he said, if he breaks, it's over. And Navarro is a guy that wins a lot of races, and so he has this horse ready to rock and roll. He's got the right jockey to blast him out of the gate. And who's to say that he's just not too fast? I don't know. The reason I'm concerned about him is because I think Matoli is a very, very fast horse, too. And Imperial Hint is outside of him. Those are very fast runners. I'm just thinking Catalina Cruiser might get the dream trip. I've had the utmost respect for John Sadler throughout his career. He used to be, known as a sprinting master with some of the greats that he trained over the years. So I'm not going to ever question Jorge Navarro. I've seen enough of him at Monmouth Park. All he does is win every race. And this is the best horse he's ever had. He's had a chance to acclimate here. He's had a chance to train here. And, the screws are tightened, and he's ready to just rock it out of there. That's the race I actually would probably say I'm most anticipating having the privilege of calling, because that's a great, great event. And I'm not going to say he's not going to win, because he might just put on a show of shows like he did back east. And who knows? That's what makes it great. This is everyone at their best. So there are a lot, when you look at horses and say he looks good or she looks good, they all look pretty good out there. And that's what makes the Breeders' Cup so special. And that's why they came up with a concept so long ago that made sense, and that's why it has, stood the test of time.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone. I think a lot of people are looking forward to that sprint. That, I think, is going to be the highlight of the weekend. You mentioned it before, Vasilika. She is 11 for 12 over the Santa Anita surface. Goes in the Filly and Mayer turf, and that means she faces off with Sister Charlie. But you've seen her. She's just a wind machine out in Southern California. What are your thoughts on Vasilika?
I think she's facing an extremely tall order here. I just, having seen both of these horses, I can't picture Vasilika beating Sister Charlie. But I'll tell you an interesting horse in that race, and it's based on physical appearance, is Iridessa, if you're looking for a long shot.
Okay.
Iridessa had the look of a champion when she was trotting around. Now, granted, I haven't seen every horse out there, but there were a few horses that really caught my eye. One of them was Iridessa, and another one that's going on the juvenile turf sprint was Alligator Alley. Both of them are big prices, but they just had an aura of class about them when trotting back after their respective works or whatever they were doing on the track on Wednesday morning. So Vasilika, I'm of course a huge fan of hers. Even when she's looked beat in the past, she's gotten up. But I just don't know it going a mile and a quarter against this level if she can sustain it. If I was betting, I would not have her on my ticket. If she wins, I'll be smiling east to west, because she is nothing. Winners win is one of my favorite hashtags on Twitter. And if she is able to beat this group, I mean, that just would be remarkable.
Yeah, she's just, as I say, a wind machine. She becomes one of the fun stories of the weekend. And finally, let's get a thought on the Classic, because there's some potential good stories in there with a late Code of Honor who may be chasing a 3-year-old Eclipse. But you talked about McKenzie before. I put McKenzie on top, and he's 2 for 6 this year with 4 second-place finishes. But I think he's just much better than that record. And I think when you look at the entire handicap division, to me, he's the best older horse. The question mark becomes the distance. But what are your thoughts on the Classic?
I really believe he's ready to fire his best shot. And I think that he's going to have a chance to prove it, and Bob has him ready to go. I have been around Baffert for a long time, and I don't think I've ever seen him. I usually am not right next to him or near him when he has important works, but I happened to be about, 50 yards away from him and his team when they were watching McKenzie's last work. And when he came downstairs, I was watching him talking to Joaquin Jaime at TBG and some other people, and he was smiling, and he was just in a real jubilant, jovial mood. And I just think McKenzie is ready to go. He's run the mile and a quarter before. And you just look at the other horses. I mean, here's the question. There was a time when you might have thought McKenzie would be even money against this field. And now because of his last loss, there's some, there are some legitimate questions. By the way, Mongolian Groom drilled him when they met last time. I don't think it was a question of anything other than Mongolian Groom was better that day. I don't feel that there was anything that Mike Smith was going to do differently to change the outcome that particular afternoon. That's just my personal opinion. And if you look, he's got to be he's a legitimate favorite. I think Vino Rosso. Here's the thing, because we watched that Vino Rosso Code of Honor replay so many times, Vino Rosso towers over him in size. He has the experience over this track. And I think that the day Vino Rosso won here, I don't think that he was necessarily, what's the word? It wasn't like an eye-catching win. It was just but it was a different Vino Rosso. We always thought of Vino Rosso as this horse coming from the clouds. He has now shown that he has outstanding tactical speed, which will put him in a striking position on McKenzie at any point in time. And then it comes down to, the finish. So I could see a scenario where McKenzie fires and Vino Rosso runs him down. That would not shock me. And then I could also see a scenario where McKenzie just finally, puts on the ultimate show to close out a campaign on his home track. And, imagine how special that makes him to be a Malibu winner and a Breeders' Cup Classic winner. That's like Spectacular Bid-esque, and I'm by no means comparing these two horses. But that's the kind of thing that Spectacular Bid was able to do in his day. And so to win 7 furlongs and, Ghost Zapper. You think about horses that win 7/8, Precision is 6 furlongs to a mile and a quarter. Those horses are so special when they're able to do that type of thing, and McKenzie needs to prove it. And I think it's not like he's going to get any kind of lonely lead in here. War of Will is a fast horse. And Vino Rosso has enough speed to stay close. Mongolian Groom has speed to stay close. To me, from a handicapping perspective, if I had to say, I would say McKenzie and Vino Rosso 1-2 in that race. I'm a big fan of Elate. I just, here's my problem with Elate. I always think back to Bayakoa trying the boys, and I think to opportunities at a mile and a quarter against the boys. It's very, very, very hard to accomplish that. And so for me, she's going to have to turn in some sort of amazing effort to beat these guys.
Yeah, I'm pretty much right in the same camp there with your top two on top. I think Elate is interesting, but I couldn't quite pull the trigger there. Frank, really appreciate the conversation. You're taking your time on a busy weekend. Wish you and everybody out there a lot of good luck over the Friday and Saturday. And, hey, have a great time.
I'm a big fan of yours, and I'm always available, and I appreciate your kind words.
I really appreciate it. Frank Mirahmadi, Santa Anita track announcer. Big weekend coming up with the Breeders' Cup. Thanks to Frank Mirahmadi for taking the time. And again, we did these interviews yesterday because of the time difference out on the West Coast. Caught up with Steve Bick after his radio show yesterday. He's been out there all week long. Always does a great job in these big events. He's trackside, watching the workouts, pulling over all the main contenders and chatting with them. So we're going to have a little bit today with Steve. Also talk a little bit about Saturday as well. So we'll have some more with him tomorrow. But up next, Sirius and XM's Steve Bick, also my co-host throughout the summer up at Saratoga on Loose on the Lead. Steve Bick coming up. To Racing Across America, joined now by our friend Steve Bick, Sirius and XM's At the Races. He is live at Santa Anita, has been for a while now, covering all the lead up to the Breeders' Cup for the radio show. Steve, good morning.
Good morning, Seth. Good morning, everybody.
You and I kind of texted back and forth yesterday, and I actually heard you mention it on the radio show earlier. I said to you when I texted, maybe we'll toss in and get some buzz horses and whatnot. And you said, man, there really aren't any buzz horses. And I heard you mention that on the radio a couple days ago. And I'm wondering if maybe normally we think of buzz horses as kind of the second tier that jump up and look good in the morning. And I'm wondering because it seems like a lot of the workout reports, they're kind of first-tier horses, so maybe they aren't buzz horses, but Matoli has worked well and Chance a lot, and a couple of the other big names have been notable. Dennis's Moment. So it's horses you kind of expect, and maybe that's why they aren't necessarily buzz horses, but there's certainly been horses that have been impressing in the morning.
Well, one of the biggest storylines, I think, of the whole Breeders' Cup is going to be not just going in, but then when the races unfold, is the potential advantage of the horses that shipped in early. Nobody got here earlier than Steve Asmussen So all of his runners, whether it's Wicked Whisper and Shoplifted and Matoli and Midnight Bisou, etc., that have had, in some cases, 2, even 3 works over the Santa Anita main track. Dale Romans came in relatively early. He did the same thing with Not This Time, and that worked out well. So the horses that came early versus the horses that arrived, right on top of the race, that includes Code of Honor, for instance, Todd Fletcher as well, Rosso. But, of course, Rosso had the win going back to the Gold Cup earlier in the year. So that story to me is really central. And with all the hubbub over, for instance, Batoli's remarkable gate work that was just eye popping. So that's where that kind of buzz came. When you ask about buzz horses, to me it's more horses that there's a ripple of discussion about, and typically it focuses on price horses that somebody has hit on on a positive attribute or two. Dunbar Road seems like a horse. If you want a horse that seems to be getting a lot of discussion, from some sharp people, Dunbar Road I think has caught some interest suddenly, whereas pre-entry time I didn't really sense that anybody was all that excited about betting her. But the closer we're getting, and the fact that Midnight Bisou is going to be one of the shortest prices of the weekend, people are trying to find reasons to go elsewhere in that race. And so Dunbar Road, 3-year-old facing the Elders, and she's a little dirtied up off of that trip to Keeneland. So that's one name. The biggest story here, Seth, is clearly the big favorites: Covfefe, Midnight Bisou, Sister Charlie, Rusted Mortar, Dennis's Moment. The horses that are going to be the shortest price and making a decision. Omaha Beach. It feels like people are lining up more and more to go against Omaha Beach, for instance. So, those are some of the themes. And after that, and after we get started tomorrow, it'll just be watching the board and putting your tickets together and firing your shot.
We'll talk a little bit about ticket construction and whatnot in a few, but first let's get a couple ideas for Friday. And we were talking before we went on the air. You thought both of the juvenile turf races were intriguing. I agree. Let's get some thoughts from you in the juvenile turf. Nice field in here. Decorated Invader comes off the win up at Woodbine in the summer after a good maiden breaker at Saratoga. And that's one of the kind of storylines, too. Saratoga runners and Saratoga winners prominent at this year's Breeders' Cup. Instructor for Chad Brown will take a lot of action. I think Andesite is interesting in that Structor, again, being from Chad Brown and off the win in the Pilgrim, going to take a lot of action. But Andesite for Brad Cox was right there in that race. But what are your thoughts on the juvenile turf?
Well, what happened in juvenile turf is interesting because this is a race that Aidan O'Brien and international interests have traditionally done well in. The Philly race has been difficult. O'Brien has got to win himself in juvenile Philly turf, and despite that balance, there's only 2 international players in here: the O'Brien pair, Arizona, and Fort Myers, and he did not draw well. Arizona, I imagine, can overcome the 12 post. This is a mile. The turn comes up pretty quick. This is a fairly narrow turf course, not as demanding on that front as Del Mar, but this isn't Belmont by any stretch. So I think Arizona, as the morning line favorite, was compromised plenty by this. I mean, I think people have to respect O'Brien and Brian Moore with this No Name Never Colt coming out of the Dewhurst. That Pinatubo is clearly the best 2-year-old male in Europe, and Arizona ran particularly well chasing him in the Dewhurst. He's the serious Euro, but I think you can play around and go reaching for prices. You mentioned Structor, and in fact, all of the horses from the Pilgrim to my way of thinking, need to improve to reach the horses, for instance, that are coming out of the Bourbon. And Piece of Cheese and Vitology for Brendan Walsh. Brendan Walsh obviously lost one of the major players in backfield out of the juvenile. So his focus will be Vitology, who I ended up picking 10-1. Castellano, they came running late at Piece of Cheese, and I don't think they want to be as far back on Friday as they were in the Bourbon. But Vitology, nice price. Decorated Invader is a horse for Christophe Clement, who is looking for his first Breeders' Cup win. He's got good cracks. Decorated Invader on Friday, and then of course, looking at the turf sprint on Saturday, he comes back with Pure Sensation. So he's got two real chances to break this long-running side. And the Decorated Invader looks like a 3-year-old physically. I mean, a big, strapping thing, big shot, instructor. I mean, I think you can play around with any and all of these. I picked Vitology. I put Arizona second, Decorated Invader third, and Arizona fourth. There's a horse on the outside, Hit the Road, for Dan Blacker, who has done nothing but get better and better coming out of his win in the Zuma Beat. He grew terribly. However, he goes from Victor Espinoza to Flavian Pratt, and that might offset the bad draw. And you're gonna be looking at box cars. I think he's 10-1 morning line, but I think Hit the Road ends up floating higher when people take into consideration the bad draw. I'll trust in Pratt to utilize him appropriately. Won't be surprised if he's one of those horses I like to bet third or the reverse tri-key. You put them third with the logicals on top, and you try to catch a horse that way. I think it's a terrifically entertaining day. Both of the juvenile turf races, I think you can latch onto a price and have some fun.
Yeah, I didn't use Arizona. That may cost me, but they going from like 10 or certainly 11 or 12 out, going the mile on the turf, I was just a little dicey there. But I did go with a Euro in the juvenile fillies turf. I thought Albino was interesting coming off the win Arc Day at Longchamp. Now, the surface is going to be significantly different, obviously, at Santa Anita as compared to soft going at Longchamp. But I thought Albino was interesting in there. And Cristal, who up at Saratoga impressed, is one I put in the mix as well. What did you think in the juvenile fillies turf?
I don't disagree at all with both Cristal for John Kimmel, who's staying at my hotel, and Albina, the Flaxman runner for Jesse Harrington. I thought the Roger Varian bated breath filly got to absolutely use prominently if you're a multi-race player. Daye has been pointed at this from day one. Daye, there's some occasions where the European connection, Aidan O'Brien, sometimes Coolmore, they'll decide at the last minute to come and throw something against the wall, and they don't mind. I mean, they've got an army of horses, so they'll take shots. Other horses like this are pointed specifically. They were campaigned with this race in mind. And generally, when you get that, you're talking about outfits with horses that know they're going to get firm turf, and that's what they're pointing for. So Daye and Albina, Cristal, those three I'm using. However, the horse I picked on top is Sharing, the Spicetown filly out of Shared Account, and to me, she's going to be a complete overlooked and overlaid opportunity. Manny Franco, and she's done nothing wrong in her three starts. Won that Salima down at Laurel. If you watch that race, you'll be really impressed. I think she's a very serious filly coming in under the radar, and she should have no trouble finding a good stalking spot. And Sharing 12-1 morning line. I can tell you a horse that's kind of worming her way into my heart is Shaden, the Andrew Balding filly for Mr. Yoshida. And this filly's got kind of a funny story. It was purchased by Yoshida from other connections, and basically is making not a last-ditch move here, but this was really not in the cards. But this is a horse that was very impressive, winning the Maison La Fille at mid-October, the Group 2. And that's a race that's been productive. I thought Shade, I got my first look at her today, and she double-barrel kicked. She was feeling really good out here this morning. And so Shaden probably is at the bottom of my tri-plays a little bit as well.
You know, you mentioned sharing Manny Franco on board, and he's got a few mounts. And I looked it up while you were talking because I was curious if he had a Breeders' Cup win. And no, his best effort in the Breeders' Cup was a third last year. But here's the guy on the up and come. Maybe this will be a little breakout weekend for him as far as the Breeders' Cup. It'll be fun to watch.
I'm certainly rooting for Manny Franco. He's got plenty of opportunities, including latching on to Ohm in the turf sprint for Peter Miller. That's a potentially live long shot mount for Manny Franco. So absolutely, would love to see Manny do well. He's got, of course, he's got the assignment on the rabbit, right? Dante for Chad, setting up Sister Charlie as well. So yeah, Manny Franco, go Manny.
Let's shift. Welcome back, and again, kind of an abrupt cutoff there because that interview and the Nick Luck interview, we cut them into Friday and Saturday. We talked yesterday, but we'll have more from Nick tomorrow. We'll have more from Steve tomorrow, and also Randy Moss will join us tomorrow. But up next to wind up this Friday edition of Racing Across America, Terry Finley from West Point Thoroughbreds. They have Decorated Invader, a solid contender in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf this afternoon. They also have a runner in one of the undercard stakes races for Calbred. So up next, President of West Point Thoroughbreds, Terry Finley. Happy to be joined now by our friend Terry Finley, President of West Point Thoroughbreds. They have a couple of live runners on the Friday card at Santa Anita. Terry, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Seth. Always great to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you on board to talk a little bit about Decorated Invader, obviously in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, but you also have a runner in one of the undercard stakes supporting the Breeders' Cup card. We'll hit on both of those in a moment. But before that, want to talk a little bit just in general about West Point Thoroughbreds. We talked with Tom Bellhouse, the COO, up at Woodbine on the weekend that Decorated Invader won the summer. And I noted to him at that point, boy, you guys were coming off a great Saratoga, and I had pulled up Equibase results, and it has just continued since then. So it's really been a couple of months, 2.5 months from a great Saratoga, and I looked, wins for West Point Thoroughbreds over the past couple of months: Santa Anita, Belmont, that Monmouth at the Meadowlands card, Churchill Downs, Woodbine, Kentucky Downs, of course, Saratoga and Del Mar. Just talk a little bit about what it's like, partnership. Always fun to jump in and for folks who are partners to be at these various different venues. But when you put together a nice 2 months like this, it has to be very fulfilling.
Well, I guess that's a great way to describe it. Seth, I said to Tommy Bellhouse, our COO, I said, I'm going to dock you like 3 days pay because you had way too much fun up in Canada. But when you go up there and get the money, I think you bet a couple dollars on our horse too. And we all know that grade ones are the toughest thing to do in this business and on the racing side. So it's been great. I mean, it really does. I know the vast majority of people, when they talk about their circumstances, they talk about the team. And I'm no different. Like it really is about team. And it's amazing when you go from start to finish, the number of people and their hands and their impact on a racehorse, especially to get a good one to the winner's circle. So we're very grateful and thankful, and we're hoping that it just continues through the weekend.
Yeah, and again, you guys are one of the more prominent partnerships in the country, and that means that you do aim for all these different venues, and that's great because you can have partners all around the country, and they like to go and watch live, and they can do it at these various venues, Midwest, West Coast, north of the border. And that, by the way, that was a great video of right after the win in the summer. Somebody tweeted out a video of Tommy and some of the partners there on the apron. Clearly, they were enjoying the Grade 1 victory.
Yeah, it's nice. you try to be cool about it, and you try, you know how they say in the NFL, just act like you've been there before when you get to the end zone, right? And don't do anything crazy. And you try to do the same thing, but man, oh man, those grade ones, they're just, as soon as you see that official sign, you're like, man, we did something really nice and really special. And so I thought it was a little on the constrained side myself, because I know Tommy loves this horse, and he loves the situation and the spot we're in overall.
Yeah, and you guys up at Saratoga, I think, had very high hopes for this horse from the beginning. Second in the career debut, and then won in the second start up at Saratoga. And as the meet progressed, I was hearing from you guys that, hey, we have a very good one heading up to Canada, and that's the way it turned out with the victory in the summer. Talk a little bit about, as I say, I think you had high hopes. You debuted very early in the Saratoga meet and just came up short in the career debut. Talk about your hopes going into that debut and your takeaway from the first start of the career for Decorated Invader.
Yeah, I tell you something. This horse had been okay. Nothing special on the farm in Ocala. April 1st or thereabouts, he started to put things together, and every time I'd call Eddie Woods, he would start the conversation with, "Hey, that declaration of war acts like a runner." So we sent him to Clement, and it took about 2 weeks, and then Clement started to say it, which and I know, Clement is not a touter. He'd much rather keep his mouth shut and let his horses perform on the racetrack. But we knew we were in the chute to start early. And it's easy to tell partners, look, it's good we didn't win, but in this case, if we would have won our first start, I think we go to the with anticipation at the end of the meet, and then we have to go to the Pilgrim or the Bourbon at Keeneland. As it turned out, we got a shot to run against Badens towards the end of the meet. We got good spacing to go to Canada, and now, I'm hoping that we're going to see the benefits of those extra couple weeks as compared to the other horses that look live in this spot, but have run a lot sooner than we ran in Canada. So it's an exciting spot, and you said it. We had been envisioning this path for a while. It doesn't happen, but when it does happen, you're like, man, that everything's falling into place. So we're happy in that respect.
The Summer Stakes is a win and you're in, right?
It is. It's the second time we won with Untamed Domain in 2017, and he came out here and he ran really well. Got beat by an Aidan O'Brien horse, and I opened the form, and the favorite, an Aidan O'Brien horse. I mean, he's tough the world over. Interestingly, that 2-year-old that he has, he's already run 7 times in Europe. So, they run their horses over there a lot more than we do, but he's going to be tough. I just hope the fact that he didn't have a very good draw is going to help us on Friday.
Yeah, the 12 going the mile on the turf certainly hangs the Aidan O'Brien runner out there. You guys, on the other hand, in the 4 hole, again, the maiden breaker up at Saratoga, that then sends you to the summer, where, as I say, at the end of the Saratoga meet, talking to some of your guys, you went up there with a certain amount of confidence, went off at 2-1 that day and won by a chart margin of over a length. So you come out of that race September 15th, and as you say, nice spacing. How did he come out of the summer, and what's your confidence level going into Friday afternoon?
Yeah, all good. I knew Christoph had a chance to back off on him, take his foot off the pedal for a couple weeks, and then he's had 4 works. And so, we couldn't have asked for anything better in the preparation phase. And we shipped out here in really good order. I love the fact that he shipped to Canada, which is very similar to shipping here, aside from the plane ride. But to leave their stall at Belmont and to go into a new place, I think that really helps, especially a 2-year-old. So we have a lot of confidence for the race on Friday. But as I've said, a number of people, what are there? There are 160 horses that are running. I mean, you don't come to the Breeders' Cup and invest the kind of money you do in the starting fees and travel costs and all that if you're not sitting on what you think is a very good race. I think we are as well.
You hold on to one of the Ortiz brothers, a couple of the top jockeys in the country, Irod and Jose. And Irod was on board for the summer, Sticks on board for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf on Friday. That has to be a bonus as well when you have one of these top jocks who says, hey, I have enough confidence, I want to come right back and ride in the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, it is. It is. Because he had won on Structure in the Pilgrim. And, of course, he rides a lot for Chad Brown. Chad Brown does an incredible job, and it's tough, and we kept our fingers crossed after the Pilgrim, and he came out one morning and he worked this colt, and he got off, and like a day later we get a text from his agent, saying we're riding you guys in the Breeders' Cup. So I think that was a really good sign, but we know that always doesn't work out, right? If it was so easy, the top agents would be at the very top of the wealth chart. We know that they're not. They make mistakes. We hope that this was the right call on their part to come and stick with us.
Talk a little bit about, because again, I know you guys from talking to you and going to your website, and again, I would advise people, if you're thinking about jumping into the game, West Point, one of the more prominent partnerships, and they're all different kinds of partnerships and different price points and whatnot, but you guys have a great website for West Point Thoroughbreds. People can Google it and visit and follow the horses very easily. You do a great job and a lot of information with the website. But looking at that and talking to you guys over the years, I know you play in the yearling auction market. You also go to the 2-year-old auctions. This one you bought last year, September 2018, at Keeneland, and I have the catalog page right in front of me. At that point, Declaration of War, still fairly new. His 3-year-olds, his first 3-year-olds were in 2018, so he's still fairly new as a sire. The dam had produced a nice stakes winner called Jubilant Girl. So there was a little bit of breeding there, some nice black type on the page. But what attracted you at Keeneland last year to Decorated Invader?
I remember it was the end of like day 4 or 5 of the sale. Joe Migliori and my daughter Erin, they were like, hey, it's a really nice Declaration of War up on the hill. And, we had been 7 or 8 days, so I think we might have jumped on the golf cart. So I appreciate the fact that there's a golf cart around the tickets all the way to the other side of the stable area. Those are the kind of things you have to be there. You have to keep talking. You gotta respect, and you gotta your team. You gotta take that input. And, that's what we do. We tell people if you see something that you like, put it on the table, and then the group will filter it out. And I'm very glad to Joe and to Aaron for bringing up the big, good-looking Declaration of War up on the hill last year.
Yeah, and again, he comes in as one of the serious contenders. A nice win up at Woodbine last time in the summer. So we wish you a lot of good luck, very good luck with Decorated Invader. But you have one on the supporting card as well. A couple of races earlier, the Golden State Juvenile, couple $100,000 up for grabs for Calbreds going 7 furlongs. You guys have one in here called Cali Dude. This one was a 2-year-old sale. A little earlier this year, we're 22 flat before the Fasig-Tipton sale out there. Validated that with his win in the career debut on October 5th. What are your thoughts on the Golden State Juvenile for Cali Dude on Friday?
Yeah, it's a good race. I thought it might be 6 or 7 horses, but and then there were 14 in there. We drew well again, and here's a horse that this was the first year that Barrett, the sale company out here, went away. They went out of business. So Fasig-Tipton, they picked up the mantle. And, I tell people, I know all the sales companies, they all do a great job. But Fasig-Tipton in particular, when I was a nobody, and I'm still a nobody, I say that was in the sense that I didn't have any money. And, basically we were buying our horses on credit cards and asking for the faith of the sales company. Fasig-Tipton, and a lot of the people are still there. They don't leave Fasig-Tipton, but they stepped up and they supported somebody, right, that they really had no reason to support. And you remember those companies and those individuals that do that. So they just had their inaugural in the middle of June, and there was no way that I was not going to at least try to be active at that sale. And, in large part, right, due to the fact that the people are world class, and the company is world class. So that's kind of the background Cali do. We like California breds, and we thought he'd be a very solid type, and turned out to be a little bit better than we thought.
Yeah, it's nice that you had that loyalty and it's being paid off with what looks like a nice horse. Only one start, but the buyer as compared to the rest of the field on Friday fits, and so we're rooting for that one as well. And I have to ask Terry, I believe Coach Rocks is entered on Sunday. Of course, you're in partnership with our friend Roddy Valente, Rick Pitino, Dale Romans, and so you're going to stick around and watch Coach Rocks on Sunday?
It's up in the air. It's up in the air. We might, if we get the job done on Friday, because you know what we owners do. When we win, we sit around like peacocks, but they're playing times at the racetrack with our tails between the legs. But I really like that filly. I've seen her train all week. I got here Sunday. Well, she seems like she's thriving right now. So I think the biggest issue is trying to get those guys to not sell. She's in the January sale, and I think she's a great at stakes winner. She's beautiful, and I just hope she didn't run through the ring and bring so much money that we have to sell her. But we'll just let that situation play out. But we're excited about Sunday. She should run really well.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun to certainly follow her with obviously all the local connections, you guys and Roddy Valente and whatnot. Terry, as always, appreciate the visit, and boy, with Decorated Invader, we are certainly wishing you a lot of good luck with the Breeders' Cup. It's always fun when you have a partnership to get to this big weekend at the end of the year. And again, good luck. We'll talk again.
Awesome, Seth. Absolutely. Really appreciate it.
Terry Finley, West Point Thoroughbreds, Decorated Invader in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. Thanks to Terry Finley, and good luck with Decorated Invader a little bit later this afternoon. Thanks also to Steve Bick for joining us. Frank Mirahmadi and Nick Luck from NBC Sports. Tomorrow, a little more from Nick Luck. He'll take a look at the Euros on the Saturday card. Also have some Saturday thoughts from Steve Bick tomorrow. And Randy Moss from NBC Sports will join us tomorrow on Racing Across America as well. Post time for Santa Anita's Friday card is 1:45 our time. Keep that in mind. Great Breeders' Cup action on the card today. Also, though, do want to remind you, it is opening day at Aqueduct. That post time kicks off at noon, and the Empire 6 mandatory is today because Belmont had to cancel part of the card last Sunday, their closing card. The mandatory moves over to today, so keep that in mind. 20-cent increment, jump in and make a play. The Empire 6 today has a $279,000 carryover with a mandatory payout. There'll be a lot of money put into the pool, so at the 20-cent increment, you can put together a nice ticket, jump in, take your shot. The Empire kicks off today at race number 5 at Aqueduct. That'll go at about 2 o'clock. So keep that in mind for today's action as well. Don't forget that, because a lot of attention obviously will be paid to the Breeders' Cup. But the Empire 6 mandatory this afternoon, opening day at Aqueduct. And again, we're about an hour away from the opener at Aqueduct. I will be back with OTB Live in, 45 or 50 minutes or so, and kind of take us through the early portion of the early portion of the day, because then Breeders' Cup action kicks off on NBC, but it kicks off at 4 o'clock, so we'll pretty much be a regular OTB Live. 4 o'clock today, NBC Sports Network has Breeders' Cup. Tomorrow, NBC Sports Network kicks off at 3:30, and then they shift over at 8 o'clock to NBC proper tomorrow for the Breeders' Cup Classic. But today, the NBC coverage, 4 o'clock on NBC Sports Network. We'll have plenty of action here on our network, obviously. The early portion of the Santa Anita card and that opening day card at Aqueduct, and much, much more as well. Appreciate your tuning in this morning for this special Breeders' Cup edition of Racing Across America. Hopefully we gave you some good ideas for this afternoon and the weekend. We'll be back tomorrow morning with a live handicapper support at 9 a.m. and, of course, the regular 10 a.m. Saturday version of Racing Across America. Enjoy the racing this afternoon. Again, be back in about 50 minutes or so with OTB Live. We'll see you then.